I see you were confused by my apparently confusing statement, but let me make it abundantly clear. A man cannot be a woman. I mean, it's obviously being pushed by politicians primarily. That's why at the United Nations, it's not...
politics. Politicians are going to push political issues.
Right, it's politics, not science. That's my point.
Yes, because of the reasons
You think that
I'm
speech is
talking about.
violence?
No, I think that
That's what that sign says. I think that you're standing on the shoulders of giants and you think that you're flying, but you're not. We are dwarfs standing on the shoulders of that great man, and we spit down on him in our ingratitude. How pathetic. They called me a fascist for defending George Washington. Behold your country, leftists. Before we go, I should point out, there are people in the back of the room who have put tape over their mouths as though they've been censored, as though they're not able to speak. So I'd just like to take the opportunity. Nobody is stopping you from speaking. We're actually inviting you to speak. If anybody would like to come up and ask a question, now's your opportunity. You can cut the entire line. Would anybody who has masking tape over their mouths, well, you don't have masking tape. Oh, you can come ask a question too. But I mean specifically the people who are making a statement and saying, I am being censored. Would any of you like to remove the masking tape, which you put on yourself, and come up here and ask a question, or would you rather stand back there and play the victim? I think we got my answer. Okay. Next guy in line. All of that has been missed by the ignorant activists who insist that GW ditch the colonial. The point that they're missing is this. The colonials that the mascot represents were not defenders of colonialism. In fact, they were the opposite of defenders of colonialism. They fought a bloody war, they risked their lives to end colonialism in America and to end rule in Great Britain. They wanted their political independence.
You fucking fascist! Shame! 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 Shame!
Oh, these kids are really proving me wrong. You see, because my premise was that these students are ignorant and not well behaved. But they're proving me wrong tonight. They called me a fascist for defending George Washington. Behold your country, leftists. Behold. I hope the cameras catch all the faces here, too. Because I think this school costs about $70,000 a year to attend. This is the job they've done. Hey, just for the people in the room, if you have, like that guy right there. What did I say that you disagree with? Does anyone anything? What did I say that any of you disagree with? Can you name one thing? What? Well, what is it? What is it? What did I say? I can't hear over all the shouting and the screeching and the... What did I say that you disagree with? Could you... Thunder? I can't... What are you saying? I can't hear it. So they can't name one thing. They can't name one thing.
I wanted to mention a few points that you brought up earlier in your speech. You said that because we think walls are wrong, we must also think walls are sinful.
No, that's what Nancy Pelosi said. That's not what I said.
That's what, okay. So Nancy Pelosi
it's immoral.
said that
Immoral.
walls are immoral and sinful. Okay. So you also said that the U.S. intervened, that the U.S. funnels money into other countries, right? In aid and things like that.
Right, much more than any other country in the history of the world by a long shot.
Did you also talk about how the U.S. intervenes in countries in other ways, like war, and that the U.S. is tearing up these countries? And
which countries
these are
in particular
the
are you
that
concerned
are fleeing. Okay, so...
You mean when the United States invaded Afghanistan to overturn the Taliban?
Do you think?
Well, because you're making statements that are not specific,
look,
so I want to get to the heart of your question.
Okay, but let me just, with what I'm giving you right now, try to answer my question. Okay, so if the U.S. is intervening in countries, and these
when we give foreign aid, we
have
intervene.
Immigrants that are fleeing, where do you expect these immigrants to go when the U.S. intervenes in these countries that don't ask for U.S. intervention?
Which country? Well, yes, the Taliban in Afghanistan didn't ask for U.S.
I'm just
intervention.
leaving it as
well, I
an
guess
open
they did ask
general
for
question.
it when they
I'm
flew
not going to
two planes.
specifically narrow it down to any sort of.
I know you can't narrow it down because when you get specific, your point falls apart. In the general, your point sounds like it makes sense, but in the specific, it doesn't make sense.
Are you gonna let me? Okay. So, where do you expect these immigrants to go?
You're blaming the United States for the free actions of people. I mean, if your point is that...
But you know what's out of these people's control is U.S. intervention in their countries, right?
Well, U.S. foreign aid is intervention in other countries. I don't think that they would say no to that sort of intervention. What specific intervention do you take issue with? What specific intervention do you believe is egregious and the fault of the United States and demands that we not have national borders?
So, what if somebody I support over there is holding up a sign that says anti-immigrant rhetoric is violent free speech. And the reason they're holding up that sign is because this anti-immigrant rhetoric became violent when children began being put in cages and attacked.
You mean during the Obama administration? Oh, okay, all right. Well, go protest Barack Obama. Don't go protest me.
And you want this to continue, right?
You're saying that the anti-immigrant rhetoric became violent when Barack Obama put kids in cages, and this is somehow my responsibility?
This is
what would you like
part
me
of what makes it violent, is that there's children in cages. You mentioned that women that
there
become
aren't children in
raped.
cages,
You
by the
mentioned
way.
women that are raped when they cross the border, but you're not mentioning the children that are being raped in the detention centers at your borders.
Well, 80% of women and girls who cross the border illegally are raped along that journey by the sadistic sociopaths who have been permitted to run free along the border. What percentage of children who have been brought in by their parents to this foreign country, what percentage of children are you suggesting are being raped by U.S. government officials?
Well, where are the children in the detention centers?
Hold on,
There's children that went
hold on,
missing as well.
You made a claim, and I'm just asking what percentage of the children being, you said U.S. children in U.S. detention are being raped by government officials. Do you have any evidence for that whatsoever?
I never said government officials.
You said they're being
raped in detention centers.
By
I
whom?
never mentioned by who.
By
Did
whom?
I?
By whom are you suggesting?
Okay, but who's keeping these detention centers?
So you don't have by whom are you saying they're being victimized? If there is an epidemic of children being victimized in these detention centers, and you have some evidence of that, you better present that. That sounds like a terrible thing.
These children from their parents in these detention centers.
So children are separated from their parents, not because of a policy of Donald Trump, not even because of a policy of Barack Obama, but because of a policy that was determined in 1997 called the Flores Agreement during the Clinton administration. And the reason for that is that when illegal aliens come into our country, they are apprehended by law enforcement. But if they're held for longer than a short period of time, you can't put children in jails. I don't think anybody wants us to put children in jails. That is literally caging children. So the children are separated from their parents because the parents are dealt with by law enforcement and the children are dealt with by the Department of Health and Human Services. The only alternative to this would be to put children in jails or else to let the parents go free without any consequences for entering the country, which is to say the only alternative is totally open borders in the United States. Is that what you're suggesting?
So you're saying the children in cages right now aren't?
Which children
in
are,
jail?
how many children are in cages right now?
The children at the
How many?
detention centers.
You're so certain of this. How many children
The
are in
federal
cages right
government
now?
received more than 4,500 complaints in 4 years about the sexual abuse of immigrant children who were
Which
being
years?
held at government-funded detention facilities, including an increase in complaints while the Trump administration's policy of separating migrant families at the border was
Well,
in place.
there's also been a surge in illegal immigration. We now have 3,000 people per month coming into this country, and a surge in children. So naturally, any offense that involves children is going to increase. I agree with you. Illegal immigration is a horrific and immoral action, and it should not be encouraged by craven politicians who think that they can grab a few extra votes by encouraging the victimization of desperate foreigners and their children. Is there an example? You said I told a lot of lies tonight. What would be an example of that?
Lies tonight? Well, no, you didn't say lies tonight. You lack rationality. You didn't cite any evidence to talk about the climate change.
I said that the mankind is not going to be wiped out within 20 years because no
Science would
scientist says...
disagree.
I'm sorry?
Science would disagree.
Which scientist?
The 97% of all scientists who say that
Say
1 to
that-
2 degrees Celsius will melt the ice caps such that there will be rising sea levels, mass extinctions, and it won't end the Earth, but it will change to a certain point the ecology of our planet such that it is much more difficult for humans to survive. That is the consensus. And a lot of climate change deniers like yourself, like Ben, like Clavin, they perpetuate that this is all a liberal hoax and that science...
No, I'm not saying it's a liberal. I mean, it's obviously being pushed by politicians primarily. That's why at the United Nations, it's not...
politics. politicians are going to push political issues.
Right, it's politics, not science. That's my point.
No, you take the science, and then you say, I don't disagree.
Which study?
You're not a
Because what you're citing, that 97% number has been around for a long time. Al Gore used it in his movie. One issue with that is, first of all, science is not made by consensus. But second of all, the questions that were asked were such broad questions as to a whole array of scientists, many of whom had no expertise in the climate whatsoever. So to use a consensus number, especially one that's so old and has been so manipulated by politicians, is, I think, not really getting to the point. We don't take polls to figure out scientific data. So if you think the world is going to end in 20 years, I thought you said that you thought so.
It's going to change to a certain point, such a human habitation will be more difficult and it will be vastly different. I'm not a doomsday, idiot. And it's not an old figure. It's ongoing. It's right now. That's a figure is decades old. It's right now.
The 97% figure is decades old.
You cited a list of statistics in your talk which you claim support the idea that illegal immigrants are dangerous or criminals.
I cited a number of statistics that show that they commit federal crimes at a significantly higher rate than native-born Americans. Yeah.
Okay. So what role do you think that structural racism and inherent bias has to play in those statistics?
I don't think that the people who enter this country illegally are forced to do so by some sort of systemic racism. There's no systemic American racist going down to El Salvador and saying, you better get up and sneak into the United States. And there's nobody in the United States who forces people who come here illegally to commit crimes. I think the premise of this question is actually quite offensive, though it's a popular assumption, which is that illegal aliens somehow don't have free will. It's the assumption that illegal aliens are somehow morally uneducated. They have no sense of right and wrong. They have no ability to control their emotions and their impulses. This is obviously profoundly racist and not true. We have free will. We have the ability to do what we want to do. This is why, by the way, the majority of Hispanic people in the United States and Hispanic voters oppose illegal immigration. The races are exactly the same. The ethnicity is exactly the same. The question of crime is different because race does not determine your criminality.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that people of color are more likely to be convicted of crimes unfairly than white people.
They're more likely to commit certain crimes, that's true. I don't think that's because of their race. I think it's because of aspects of their free will and perhaps of culture.
That's not true. I'm talking about...
That is true. What I just said is true.
I'm not quite sure where you're getting your statistics from, and you choose
from
to
the federal
interpret
government.
Them. You choose to interpret
from
them
the
in your...
Bureau of Justice Statistics and Department of Homeland Security.
Can I talk? Is that
well,
okay?
you said you didn't know where I got my statistics from, and I'm telling you where I get them from.
Well, it would have been nice if you could have let me finish my sentence. Anyway,
I was answering your question.
You are using your statistics for your own agenda, and that's your prerogative.
I'm citing statistics because they're true.
I'm talking about the fact that I'm faculty here. I also support our protester in the back.
What do you support specifically? Do you think that anti-immigrant rhetoric is violent free speech?
Yes, because of the reasons
you think that
I'm
speech is
about.
violence?
No, I think that
that's what that sign says.
The conversation that you're having is oppressive.
So I am oppressing people by what I'm doing. So I am exerting violence on people by my speech. That's what the sign says, and that's what you just said.
It contributes to...
And the protester is saying that's exactly what I'm doing, and she's saying that's exactly what her sign means. So that means that you, a faculty member at an American public university, paid for by taxpayer dollars, are conflating speech with violence.
Yes. Speech can be violent. What you are saying contributes to systemic racism in this country. It means that my students of color are pulled over and accused of stealing a car when they did not.
I'm not pulling anybody over for stealing
I'm
any
not
cars.
saying that you
I see many
personally
people
did.
of many different races in this room. They all seem to be doing just fine. I don't think any of them have felt violence because they listened to a lecture on basic facts about our immigration system. The question was, have I asked people in this room if they've felt as though some violence has been committed on them? No, I haven't asked, because no violence has been committed on you. Because violence is not a subjective feeling. Violence is an objective fact. I can objectively gauge whether or not someone has become violent. The other day, I was at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Some protester attacked me with some weird chemical. That was an objective act of violence. But somebody disagreeing with me, such as some people in this room are doing, are not committing violence on me. And I would say to you, as a faculty member at a taxpayer-funded university, this is the foundation of liberal education. If you cannot understand that there is a difference between speech and violence, you don't understand anything that undergirds the liberal arts or liberal education. And that is a real shame. And I say this with all respect and with great distress for our universities. If our teachers don't understand the difference between ideas and violence, between speech and violence, then they are in no position to educate the next generation of Americans.
I wish I didn't have a time constraint because I have a lot of things I want to get through, but I'm going to read 2 quotes and ask how you justify this as, quote, a hero, and, quote, one of the greatest men in history, as you said through your speech.
Where are your quotes from?
The quotes are from his journal.
From
so
where?
In his journal,
I'm sorry.
His journal.
From the Journal of Christopher Columbus?
Yes.
Okay.
In his journal, he says, quote, "Let us in the name of the Holy Trinity go on sending all the slaves that can be sold." He also says, quote, "The Indians are so naive. I will bring as much gold and slaves as you need." That actually was not in his journal. That was to the court in Madrid.
I assume it wasn't in his journal because he would be writing to himself. Right, so you're saying Christopher Columbus agreed in a letter to his bosses who were funding his voyage that he would fulfill the terms of his voyage? That's what you're saying? This is some shock.
There's 2 parts to it. The first one was from his journal, where he quite literally said, "Let us in the name of the Holy Trinity go on sending all the slaves." The second one was to the court in Madrid, appeasing them, saying, "Yes, let's go get all these slaves from
Well,
this land."
you mentioned in the name of the Holy Trinity, Christopher Columbus baptized many natives. He did it personally. And he obviously was bringing the faith to the New World. You're at a Catholic university. If you believe that the faith is true and good and beautiful, as I do, as all Christians ought to do, then that's a wonderful thing to spread the gospel to people who've never heard it before.
I think you misheard the quote. The last part of the quote
I don't
is
think
the
I
most
misheard the
important.
quote, but you can
Go
repeat it
on,
if you like.
In the name of the Holy Trinity, what should
Yes.
we do in that name? Go on sending all the slaves that can be sold.
So he sent slaves to the New World. That is true. Or back to Spain. That is true. That was part of the deal. And if you listen to my lecture, I'm not sure. I heard your question, but I'm not sure you heard my lecture. He agreed to the encomienda system as a political concession because he was outfoxed by a local mayor named Roldan. This was the cause of much of his consternation in the New World. It's the reason that Bobadilla was able to take over and usurp control from him in the West Indies. This is a political reality. This is not a beautiful thing. It's a terrible thing. Slavery is an awful thing. None of us disagrees with that. But for us now, as people who have benefited, all people of the whole world who have benefited from the greatest country, the most profitable, the most charitable, the most equitable, the most just, the one that allows you to stand there and ask me that question, for us to spit on that man who made all of it possible because he made some moral concessions in order to take the most ambitious voyage at that time in the history of man is so bizarrely ungrateful. It is so ignorant of historical and political realities as to be naive and sophomoric.
My question was, how can you justify calling him a hero? I agree.
I've just justified it. That's my explanation. I think that you're standing on the shoulders of giants and you think that you're flying, but you're not. We are dwarfs standing on the shoulders of that great man, and we spit down on him in our ingratitude. How pathetic.
I'm a full-time professor here. I also am Italian-American, and I happen to agree with the protester in the back.
Well, I have to say, as a professor, that you would come. I really appreciate that because I know students come out a lot, but professors don't always come out to hear opposing points of view, so that's a wonderful thing.
It's my duty. But
I've left you speechless. I've dazzled you.
Thank you. In 1492, before a racist and genocider came to this land, there were people living here. Every inch of this land was occupied.
Just as a matter of history, not every inch of the land was occupied. There were huge areas that were completely wilderness.
I was quiet the entire time you spoke. Those people still exist. The North American indigenous people, Central and South American, they're still here. And I would like to know how you can say that they have no ancestral claim to this land, and that as a white person, you can say that they cannot migrate freely and cannot use the land freely that they rightfully own and have for thousands of years.
Well, Mike, I'd like you to be more specific. Which people specifically and which land specifically? Because there were lots of different peoples in the northern and southern, in North America and South America at the arrival of Christopher Columbus. So which people do you think have a claim to which land?
I'm talking about the Native Americans.
But there were many different Native American
tribes. Would you
tribes.
like me to name all the tribes?
Yes, and I'd like you to name, and the reason I would like you to name all the tribes is because there were many tribes who conquered many other tribes. So just as an example, thank you. Just as an example, the Comanche Indians come in and they conquer areas run by the Apache Indians. Now the United States comes in and it owns that land. To which tribe should that revert? To which tribe should that land revert? The Comanche who had it before us, or the Apache who had it before them? Moreover, for the people who still exist, you're referring to Christopher Columbus in an ahistorical way by calling him some sort of racist or some sort of genocidal maniac. The man never committed any sorts of genocide at all, and he was actually known among the Spanish explorers for his good treatment of the natives. That point is neither here nor there. And I encourage people to read biographies of Christopher Columbus because there's a lot of historical fiction out there. The point on that is that when the Spanish came to this country, and to this continent, they did create a new race known as Latinos. This is a mixture of Spaniards and Native American populations. So if we are going to revert certain land to native populations, why would we not then immediately take that land away from them because they also descend from Spanish explorers? In what sort of atomized way would you define your own race, your own identity? I think this is a very backwards and ultimately impossible view of personal identity that puts your stock in some particular ancestor rather than something that is larger than yourself. I think it's a madness of the modern left, and it leads to crazy policy proposals, such as saying that somebody who descends from a native population in Colombia has a right to move to any apartment he wants to in New York because of race or something. We can certainly have a response.
Thank you for not answering my question, and in the future...
I think I did answer you. How specifically could I answer your question?
If you could not lower the microphone until the person's done speaking, I think that'd be better for everyone. Thank you. That's all.
So you were done speaking. I think the gentleman did just fine then. I like your cape.
Thank you. It's a flag.
What's the flag?
Soviet flag.
Oh my gosh, that's not good. I take it back.
Anyways, so you claimed that the reason that there are more transgender people now is because they are more confused. Even today, the hate crimes against transgender people are much higher than those against any other demographic. So is it not more likely that there are more transgender people now because...
Are there more hate crimes in the United States against transgender people or Jews?
I'd guess transgender, but I am not sure.
You are certainly not sure. That's right. It's the answer is Jews.
Okay.
That'd just be a numbers thing, though. Like, you're like,
It is a numbers thing, but you cited a numbers thing, so then I'm citing a different numbers thing.
0.1% of people in America are transgenders, and yeah, like 100% of them could be like affected by crimes, and only 1% of
Well, we're getting very confused with our numbers. If you're saying it's 0.1% of Americans are transgender, we've also heard it's 0.2 to 0.4%, and now we're hearing that 12% of American millennials identify as transgender or gender nonconforming. So what number is it? I'm certainly confused, and it seems to me that these people are very confused as well.
Is it not, though, more likely that people are identifying as transgender now because of a decrease in the percentage of hate crimes as opposed to previous decades?
Well, the identification is part of the confusion because a man isn't a woman and a woman isn't a man. That's the confusion. I see you were confused by my apparently confusing statement, but let me make it abundantly clear. A man cannot be a woman and a woman cannot be a man. There is sexual difference. The sexes are not indistinguishable. They're not indiscernible. And there's a great confusion in our culture that men can be women, but they can't.
I'd like to start off by noticing that as each speaker gets up here, this speaker then goes ahead and answers, and his supporters get to go ahead and applaud. I would like to start off by applauding the people that have the courage to stand up against this hate.
You're certainly welcome to applaud anybody you like. I take no responsibility for who applauds for what.
Well, you haven't given them space. That was my point. But I do have questions here. What I was saying is the structure here has been very specifically designed to go ahead and to support a particular point of view.
Could you give an example of that? Because here's what I think happens. People come up and ask me a question, and then I give them an answer, and then somebody else comes up and asks me a question, and then I give them a different answer. Could you please show me the nefarious and unfair structure of that Q&A?
I'll be happy to, because after their last comment, you get a chance to comment, and your supporters go ahead and applaud. When the speaker is then going ahead and when the person from the audience is talking, you immediately talk afterwards, and there's no space.
Yes, that's true, because they're asking me a question, because
Exactly.
I'm the speaker and they're the ones asking the questions.
Exactly.
Right. So I guess they can go give a speech somewhere else, and then their supporters can go and applaud them. But that's not what we're engaged in here.
So you do agree then that there was...
I agree that I'm giving a
it's
speech and
unprofessional.
people are asking me questions. I agree with that, yes. I didn't know that I had to clarify that.
So let me go ahead and, frankly, there's so much misinformation here, I don't even know where to start, but I will try. You talk about melting pots and assimilation. I don't know to what extent you cook in the kitchen and you don't cook. I have no idea.
Well, I'm of Italian descent, so I can work my way around a kitchen a little bit.
If that's the case, then you will know that a melting pot is not something that you take a pot, you put the first ingredient in, and you add other things, and you expect everything else to go ahead and take on the flavor of that first ingredient. Rather, a melting pot is a mixture of different ingredients, and some of those ingredients you want to blend in, and other ingredients you want them to maintain their character, and you don't want them to blend in very much, and you put them in a particular order. And you talk about what makes America. There's plenty of things in this country that are a huge problem, and there's plenty of things in this country that are very good. One of the best things about this country is that as each culture comes in, we're able to go ahead and look at that culture and take on the best things from that culture. America is not a English-only culture. We have taken on from all different cultures, and it's the strength of this country that we have gone ahead and taken on. It's the strength of this country that you can't look at people and tell which ones are Americans and which ones are not.
That's what I said in my speech.
That's
literally what I said in my speech.
What you said is you expect them to assimilate.
Right, I expect assimilation, and I said it's a beautiful thing in this country that you can't look at someone and tell who's the American and who isn't. I said the exact same line that you just said.
But you seem to imply that when people come in...
Well, you know what they say happens when you assume. Yeah, is there a question or is this a speech?
Yes, there is.
What's the question?
Okay, so the question is do you realize that 100 years ago, you mentioned that previously people have come in and then they immediately assimilate. 100 years ago, there were areas in New York City where you couldn't function if you couldn't speak Yiddish, if you couldn't speak German, if you couldn't speak a Slavic language. 130 years ago in Kansas, in a very large area in Kansas, German was such a predominant language that the Native Americans assumed that the language in this country was German, not English.
That would be a true tragedy.
We've never had a situation where people come in and they immediately start speaking.
But I never claimed that people immediately assimilate. I never claimed that in my speech. I think you're making fine points. They're just not points that in any way contradict what I've been saying this afternoon.
I'd like to ask just one more question, then I'll leave. In the past, when the young Americans have had speakers here, you mentioned that each person gets one question, and you've been very accommodating about letting many of us have a conversation. But in the past, there's never been that kind of a statement, and I'm just wondering why there would be a statement here. It sounds like you're afraid of having a conversation, though I will admit that you have been carrying on a conversation. And I just want, in closing, I just want to say that what's really important is that we embrace other ideas and other cultures, not that we assume or force people to go ahead and take on what's already there.
Well, I appreciate your comments. I would like to point out that it seems you have criticized me for saying things I didn't say. I agree with many of the points that you've made, and then you're criticizing other speakers who have spoken for Young Americans Foundation instead of me. So I'm pleased that you had a nice time at the lecture. I agree with many of your points, and I love the open exchange of ideas. Of far greater concern to society is the recent scourge of cancel culture, which threatens to make our public discourse coarser, falser, and crueler. Cancel culture takes two forms. In one version, cancel culture occurs when a once obscure individual achieves some modicum of fame or success, at which point a social media swarm stirs up and digs up some tweet that guy sent 10 years ago, at which point his achievement is totally taken away from him and he is canceled. Even the kindest of souls find themselves subject to this sort of cancel culture. I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about a guy named Carson King, just recently an Iowa football fan. Carson King held up a sign at a game that said, "Please send beer money," and it included his Venmo address. Now we have some people leaving. They're canceling Carson King too. Well, I'll tell you about Carson King, and you can leave him if you want. He held up that sign and raised $1 million. And the reaction that he got from the American public was exactly the reaction that we're seeing in this room. People who don't want to listen to a thing, who don't want to look at grace, who don't want to live in a culture that takes each other seriously, but a culture that merely wants to rip people down for no reason. Now, the one positive thing about that culture is the minute that all the schmucks leave, the positive thing is the minute all the schmucks leave, the people who are waiting in line all the way out the door, they get to come in and fill the seats. So welcome to those of you who were not here before.